are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Due to the government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is being held remotely in accordance with the provisions set out in the local authorities and police and crime panels. And with Cambridgeshire County Council's own virtual meeting protocol. A decision summary and minutes of the meeting will be produced in the usual way, and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the meeting page of the Council website. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I would ask all members of the committee to keep their video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep their microphone muted, except when I invite them to speak. Officers will join us to introduce their reports in the usual way. Any members wishing to ask questions or make a comment should indicate this by clicking the raised hand function on the right-hand side of their screen. When I invite you to speak, please unmute your microphone, ask your question, and then mute it again to allow the officer to respond. There will be no points of order or personal explanation. As with all new arrangements, especially those involving new systems, there's always a risk that we may run into technical problems. And I would ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment whilst the fault is addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. Please also note that to facilitate discussion, I intend to waive the committee procedure rule limiting members' contribution to 5 minutes. I also propose to allow members to speak more than once on each item if appropriate. However, make sure that your contributions remain concise and to the point. I would remind members and officers that all virtual meetings will be recorded. Firstly, I would like to welcome 3 new members of the committee. Councillor Derek Giles, Noel Kavanagh and Peter MacDonald. And I'd also like to welcome back Councillor Peter Hudson. I'll begin by calling all the names of all members of the committee to establish your attendance, and please confirm your attendance. Councillor Anna Bailey.
Present.
Councillor Ian Bates.
Present.
Councillor Simon Bywater.
Present.
Councillor Steve Criswell.
Present.
Councillor Lorna Dupre.
Present.
Councillor Derek Giles.
Present.
Councillor Mark Goldsack.
Present.
Councillor Roger Hickford.
Present.
Councillor Peter Hudson.
Present.
Councillor David Jenkins.
Present.
Councillor Noel Kavanagh.
Present.
Councillor Peter MacDonald.
Present.
Councillor Eliza Machini.
Present.
Councillor Lucy Netzinger.
Present.
I believe we have apologies from Councillor Tom Sanderson.
Correct.
Councillor Josh Schumann.
Present.
And myself, Councillor Steve Count. Thank you all. Agenda item number 1. This item is to note the Council appointed myself as the Chairman and Councillor Hickford as the Vice Chairman for the municipal year 2020 to 2021. Agenda item number 2, apologies for absence. We've noted the absence of Councillor Tom Sanderson, and also declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I have had no indication to speak, so thank you. Agenda item number 3, minutes of the meeting on 14th May 2020. We are being asked to approve the minutes as a correct record. Can I ask any member who does not agree with this proposal to click the raised hand function on the right side of your screen now? I see no objections to the proposal to approve the minutes as a correct record, so we will take that as carried. I now move to the action log. An updated action log has been included in the published papers for the meeting. All the actions are marked complete except for the first action on page 12, which is still ongoing. Can I ask the Chief Finance Officer to provide an update, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to inform members that the report that we're going to consider later on this agenda regarding the COVID-19 update now includes actual expenditure incurred for April and May, and that will be updated on a monthly basis. I had originally envisaged that would cover off this action because obviously it highlights the actual costs incurred, and that thereby presumption that the rest are assumptions. However, just reflecting on that matter, there are a couple of commitments in the financial projections which go beyond the actual costs incurred to date, and there are two examples. One is around the social care resilience, which we have agreed we will continue to pay until the end of June at this point, and therefore the June costs are not in the actual cost incurred to date. And likewise, we have committed to social care bed capacity on a block bed basis and for six-month period, and therefore only the costs that we've incurred at this point are shown in that column. So if I may, Chairman, I would just highlight those particular two instances and the costs associated with that, and we'll deal with that by email to the members of the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If any members have questions on the action log, would they use the raised hand function now to show this? Thank you. No members have indicated that they wish to speak, so we will take the action log as noted. Thank you, Chris. Agenda item number 4. We have received no public questions or petitions, so we will move to the next item of business. Agenda item 5, the Integrated Finance Monitoring Report for the period ended 31st March. Can I invite the Head of Finance, Chris Mallion, to introduce the report, please?
It's actually Tom Kelly, Chairman.
Okay, Tom Kelly, if you could introduce the report then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. This is the year-end financial monitoring report for the Council. Page 15 shows the year-end revenue position, and this is a £0.2 million pressure. This is very, very close to delivering an on-budget position overall, and the closest position we've had to delivering on budget for 2 or 3 years now. Page 17, also pleasing in that the overall forecast, the thick black line that you can see there, is stable across the whole of the period, fluctuating within a relatively narrow range for the Council as a whole. And it's meant that notwithstanding some of the pressures we've seen in frontline services, the green line, for instance, for people and communities, the Council as a whole has been able to manage out and balance that position. That increase in people and communities across the year is further illustrated by page 14, which shows the growing number of older people accessing services across the year. Section 4 confirms that the summary of the savings tracker, and that £13.2 million worth of savings have been delivered council-wide this year. And section 13 gives a council-wide cross-year summary on the overall financial position, taking account of some of the external and contextual factors as well. We note there's been reducing numbers of children in care, and that's led to a more favourable financial result for that area of the council, albeit at the same time a growing deficit in the high needs block of the dedicated school grant, which is ring-fenced. And indeed, that deficit now sits at a higher figure than the accumulated balances held by individual schools, which are summarised in section 6. Section 7 confirms the level of general reserves reflecting all of that, and I'm pleased to say that keeps it at the expected policy level that members have set in the medium-term financial strategy. Just circling back to the recommendations at the front of the report, A is about noting the overall financial position for the year, and B and C confirm capital financing reflecting either additional contributions received or optimising the amount the council needs to attribute to its minimum revenue position going forward, taking account of the capital funding received as at year end. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tom. Would any members of the committee wishing to ask a question or make a comment, please use the raised hand function to indicate this. Thank you. Councillor Anna Bailey.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Apologies, I dropped off. My internet went down a few moments ago, but I appear to be back okay, so I hope I'll manage to stay online. I really just wanted to not let this opportunity go begging, really, to just talk about the success of the last financial year, because it would be easy with everything that's going on to overlook the success that we've had over the last financial year. I mean, to come out at year end with just a £0.2 million pressure on the enormous multi-million pound budget is a huge achievement, coming on the back of, as it does, many years of very significant savings, which have to be, remade every single year, and then new savings on top. It's been an enormous task and a Herculean effort, and I think it's important that it goes, recognised, that we thank our officers, and as chairman of the Adults Committee, I just wanted to thank our officers very much. I think it's extraordinarily accurate budgeting over the last year, helped, we must acknowledge, by quite significant grants coming in from central government to support adult social care, and for that we are grateful. It was necessary. We must keep up the pressure. We know we're underfunded in Cambridgeshire, compared with other types of upper tier authorities. But to deliver £13.2 million of savings, after the years and years of savings that we've had, is not insignificant at all. And much of that is in, the Adult Social Care Directorate. And much of it is due to the Adults Positive Challenge programme, which has astonishingly accurately delivered. There's been some delays around some of the savings around the tech work stream, but we're confident that those savings will come in, and that not just about savings, much more importantly, that many of those initiatives have actually improved outcomes for people, because we've changed the way that we do things, we've changed our thinking, and that's what's important to me. But obviously we have to balance the books as well. And I really just wanted to recognise Charlotte Black in particular, because she, it's probably going unnoticed, but she was appointed the Director of Adult Social Services over the last financial year. She's done a stunning job. She's really controlled everything incredibly well. Her knowledge is unbelievable. And I just want to thank all our officers throughout social care, because without them on the front line, implementing what we've asked them to do, it wouldn't happen. And I think it's really important that, these efforts go recognised.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bailey. I concur with all those comments. Thank you. Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah, it's a question on detail. 3.27. It's commercial and investment, and within that, there's under outdoor education, there's the Grafham Water Centre, and I was just drawn to the fact that there's quite a deficit there, and I was just hoping that there's some plan in place to make the Grafham Water Centre more viable. And if not, is there someone there to champion the Grafham Water Centre? Because I think it's a terrific asset for Cambridgeshire to have. It's an iconic centre known nationally and internationally. And so just seeing those figures, I was just a bit worried. And I just hope that some funds will find their way to support the centre when we come out of this current crisis. So it's a observation and a question there.
Okay, we'll pick that up in a little while. Thank you, Noel. Councillor Lorna Dupre.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 points of detail and then a larger point to make. On the detail, the first one is about the community transport, which is on page, what page is it? Page 18 of the agenda, the full agenda bundle. And it talks about a lack of bidders there. And there has been a problem with lack of bids for some of those less attractive routes and community transport. I think we all know the reasons why there have been community transport difficulties in Cambridgeshire fairly recently, and we're still not recovered from the events by a long way of the last couple of years. I'd like to ask in what way it's possible to address that and what is being done to ensure that valuable community transport routes can be retained. The second question of detail is well, it's an observation rather than a detail, to note the huge rise in the level of adult social care debt on page 29 of the agenda bundle. There is a question, I wasn't sure whether that relates to debt that is still regarded as claimable or whether it includes debts that we are likely to be writing off. And I know that the paper is going to audit and accounts on that, but that represents a huge worry, not just for the authority, but for all the individuals and families involved in that. That's a huge burden and a very unfortunate situation. The third point is on the county farms and the which is rated black in terms of having achieved none of the projected savings from repayment of financing costs. It is rated black, but there's absolutely no explanation given in the final column about what has led to that being black and what is being done to address that. And I'd be grateful for some clarity on that. But my final point is the bigger one about how in a couple of places, some quite large numbers in this year end have been down to luck as much as judgment, and that's not to underestimate the hard work of our officers, who I do know work very hard on this, but I just wanted to draw attention to two things that have been very fortunate in the authority's financial favour. The first one, of course, is the failure of the Mbt plant, which resulted in the county council fining Amy a considerable amount of money for that. That's not good in terms of our waste record, but financially that has helped. The point I particularly wanted to make, though, was about the winter maintenance and the winter gritting. It's only a few months ago that we were staring an overrun of £463,000 in the face in relation to this service. And I'm very grateful to officers, particularly Steve Cox and Graham Hughes, for sitting down with Councillor Manning and myself and working through all the detail of how that budget works, how it's been put together. And that has exposed the extent to which we are really at serious peril financially when there is a harsh winter. We've been very fortunate that it's been a mild winter and that the number of winter gritting runs has been much, much lower than was originally estimated, which is why we're looking at a pressure of only £74,000, I think, rather than the nearly £500,000 we were looking at earlier. And each additional run is a very great cost to this authority because of the way the contract has been constructed. I'd like to know what officers are doing to continue to monitor that budget head and how we handle it, and what can be done to try to address that for the future, because there is a huge financial risk to us from the weather, which is, as we all know, becoming increasingly variable and unstable. So I wouldn't want to, as I say, underestimate the work of officers in keeping on top of these large amounts of money, but I would like to stress that there are some elements which have been very much down to luck this year.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. Councillor Netsinger.
Thank you. So the points I want to make are quite specifically in relation to two elements of the children and young people's budget. The first one is that, I mean, the biggest pressure on the council, which is accounted for in a very peculiar way, is the nearly £11 million contribution that's required for the dedicated schools grant. The last time that this came to the Children and Young People's Committee, it was still quite unclear how that money was going to be found. The lack of clarity with that is that because that huge amount sits somewhere between the schools, the Department for Education and the County Council's responsibility, and where that money is going to be found from, as far as I'm aware, is still very unclear. And it would be helpful if there is any update on the future expectation about where that will come from, because it's an absolutely massive hole in our budget if it's all expected to come from the County Council. So that was the first thing, which is a pretty major point. And I know it's something that the council has been working hard on, and I know it's something that we're not the only council that is in this position, and it's something that the Local Government Association is also tackling with the Department for Education. The other one is a much smaller point on the savings tracker. On page 50 on the savings tracker, there is a black entry 6.263 around new roles being term time only, and the savings there have not been made. And it says, it says that all new roles will be term time only. Is this voluntary as the original saving was supposed to be, or is this going to be brought in as a compulsory thing for new roles? And if so, I hope that there've been, my concern is that that's going to make it much more difficult to recruit for roles in that department. So that's my two questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Netsinger. Councillor Peter MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for welcoming me to the committee. Just a question of clarification and understanding. Section 3.22, obviously people and communities is a very significant area. Reading further down, older people's services, pressure reported at the year end, unsurprisingly, and of course that's a snapshot. Presumably we would expect a significant increase as we go through the new financial year as a result of COVID. That's kind of an open question, just to get some sense of what that pressure would look like. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Josh Schumann.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond firstly to a question. I'm sure the officers will respond better than I, but to Noel Kavanagh, Councillor Kavanagh's comments around the outdoor centres and particularly Grafton Water. And that's just to say that the there were historic issues with payroll, which was identified by the officers and teams, which was rectified in payments to staff, which has created an extra in-year pressure this year, which is why it's identified as having the overspend. However, I just want to make comment that the commitment through the OFR process, the outcome focus review that has been carried out on the outdoor centres, particularly brilliantly well led by Councillor Simon Bywater, has resulted in an absolute commitment to the outdoor education centres. That piece of work has concluded that we intend to support the outdoor education and produce business plans which absolutely ensures their sustainability going forward. Those business plans have been worked up and are being continually worked up and monitored, particularly in light of the COVID challenges. So there is an awful lot of work going forward to try and make sure that the outdoor centres are continue to do their good work. And I'm sure members will remember that this committee and the CNI committee approved a significant capital contribution towards those outdoor centres for to rectify historic issues with the ageing buildings, etc. And hopefully this is just another indication of the council's commitment to hopefully ensuring their future. So that hopefully helps answer some of Councillor Kavanagh's questions. I'm sure, as I said, the officers might be able to add more meat to the bones if there are. But just to end on a comment that I just find it quite surprising and shocking at times that the more we do, as members to set strategic direction, and the harder the officers work in order to bring us in budget, it can be perceived as some as good luck or good fortune. And I think that does a huge disservice and injustice to the hard work and commitment that has meant that we're in this fortunate and good position. And to call it luck is really not a reflection of the brilliant work that we do at Cambridgeshire County Council. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Sherman. Councillor Bywater.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I was going to just touch on that eloquently put over point by Councillor Schumann regarding Grafham Water, just to reassure Councillor Kavanagh that we've recently appointed a strategic business manager to oversee all 3 sites, not just Grafham. It's a very exciting time, although there are significant challenges because of COVID and the implications of COVID, and obviously the effects it's having on our outdoor education, like lots of services within the council. But rest assured, you know, I'm holding people to account and also trying to challenge and bring about praise when it's required. So that's the position of Grafham Water. Also, just to touch on Lucy, yes, Lucy, you're absolutely right. There are significant challenges. We will and continue to do through CYP, you know, tackle the issues of the DSG and what's identified in schools forum. There is a SEND recovery plan in place, but again, COVID has obviously taken priorities. But I have been and continue to ask for papers to come to CYP committee. I had a conversation only last night with Wendy and John about what we can see in relation to the recovery plan for SEND, and also the schools funding consultation that's on pause at the moment and the outcomes of that potentially as well. So it is a work, we are continuously work really hard, as is John and the team. So again, it's going to be a significant challenge going into the new financial year. And then finally, just to sort of reiterate what Councillor Bailey said in relation to, you know, some of the stuff we've done in CYP has been absolutely outstanding. And I'll give you an example. You know, we look at the children in care numbers. This time last year, it was a significant challenge. Lou and the team, backed by the CYP committee members, you know, introduced the Children's Change Programme, and we can see the effects of that in our numbers in children in care. However, it's not just about numbers. This is about the outcomes of young people. Rest assured, my #1 priority as chair is to see the successful outcomes of all young people in Cambridgeshire. And I'm personally involved in a new pilot programme, which is mentoring some of our care leavers. I actually went on the first training on Saturday morning. It's the next 3 weeks where we've got some really key business people training up to be mentors for some of our young people in the county. It's a really exciting pilot, and I think it's going to be good for some of our young people. And then just finally, just to thank everybody in the service, from Wendy down to everybody on the ground. Everybody's been outstanding. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, we do get things wrong at times, but you know, let's just roll our sleeves up and go into the new year ready to tackle on all the same challenges that we see year on year. But Chairman, thank you for indulging me.
Thank you, Councillor Bywater. Councillor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to community transport, it's certainly quite right that some of the contracts came in at less than we had expected and less than previously. But also just remind, we actually had one contract which no provider wanted to provide. So it is quite a mixed market sometimes in community transport. With regard to winter maintenance, as Councillor Dupre quite lightly pointed out, the weather varies from one year to the next, and we have traditionally responded when we've had bad winters and respond accordingly when it's not so bad. So there is no surprises here with the winter maintenance at all. We had a fairly mild winter, and therefore that reflects the outcome that you could quite see. Another year, another change. Who knows whether this coming winter will be lots of snow or not. But all I can assure residents is that when we do get a lot of snow and bad conditions on the road, we maintain the winter maintenance at the level that we're currently doing. I might also add that our commitment to winter maintenance is much higher than it is in other counties throughout this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Could I ask officers to respond to some of the questions that have been asked, please?
Chairman, if I start, and perhaps Tom will pick up any elements of questions that I've either not got the answers to or have missed. I'm not going to talk about Grafham Water because I think Councillor Bywater and Schumann have done that more eloquently than I could have done. But yes, whilst we are looking at both the short-term and the long-term position of that valuable asset to the Cambridgeshire community. Community transport, Councillor Bates has responded again, answering the sort of general questions that are raised around that, and we do what we can to stimulate the market where that's possible. But if it's not possible to create a market, obviously that causes us some challenges. Adult social care debt, I think was the next question. The numbers in front of you do include debts that haven't yet been written off that are deemed to be irrecoverable. So that's an ongoing process, and we will be reporting on future debt write-offs as part of a strategic review of the overall debt portfolio. County farms, the black item on the savings tracker, I believe was in relation to further additional investments in order to create additional returns through the rental stream. I need to check with the new Assistant Director of Property, Tony Cooper, to ascertain whether that's just we're not getting proposals coming forward or whether they're being held back. But perhaps I could come back to members in relation to that. Again, Councillor Bates responded to the highways maintenance. Highways maintenance is a difficult one to budget for obvious reasons. If we increase the budget and it's not required, then that's effectively over taxation. If we under provide for it, obviously clearly there is an in-year pressure. And what we do know is that the year by year, the level of investment required is inconsistent and obviously driven by the level of weather. So we are looking at how we can average that more accurately. But the one thing we can guarantee is we're never going to get it spot on. So it's either going to be under or over. But we're doing what we can to more accurately reflect on an ongoing basis the level of need. Councillor Nessinger's question regarding DSG, it is, as Councillor Nessinger highlighted, it's not an issue just for us. There are actually councils that are in a worse position than ourselves, but it is of major concern. In terms of the overall financial position of the council, we are told that we can't use general fund support in order to mitigate the costs associated with special needs. We can't charge it directly to DSG. So we are in a bit of a dilemma, which has to be resolved at a national level. We are doing what we can. We write to the government on a fairly regular basis to try and get this matter resolved. We had a response from them just last week to say that they've noted our concerns and issues, but there is still no resolution on that matter because the focus at the moment is around COVID-19. But we will continue to put that pressure on the government because it does need to be resolved sooner rather than later. I don't know whether Tom can answer the issue about the new roles on schools, but if not, we will come back to members because I don't have the answer to that. And in relation to COVID pressure, yes, clearly this is a report to the end of March, but that there will be ongoing pressures in relation to that service area in 2020-21. I think that sort of covers everything, Chairman, but I don't know whether Tom has any further additional information for members.
No, nothing further, Chairman, from me.
Sorry, Tom, could you repeat?
Nothing further from me, Chairman. Yeah, as Chris says, there is more information in item 7 about the in-year impact as a result of the pandemic on adult social care. So we'll come back to that. And the savings tracker on the term time roles. Yeah, the reason there's a variance there is because there hasn't been the take up amongst existing staff, and I think the roles where that's considered going forward are very much paired to where they are education focused, and term time is appropriate, but we can probably get a more detailed response for Councillor Nessinger on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got no more hands to speak, so I'll sum up with some extra information that I hope will provide useful. The first was about the overall budget, status of the overall budget and the overall budget moving forwards. Huge thanks to all the officers for getting us to a position that is so close to year end. It is a position that we aim for and strive for, but to get within £200,000 on the £600 million plus budget, it is well done to everybody involved. Moving forward, some of the things that we were looking at, such as the fair funding review, the business rates retention scheme, and the comprehensive spending review, they are moving off into the distance due to coronavirus. And so that will affect our future budgeting and the uncertainty of that, not just due to coronavirus, but to the impacts on those three streams that were going to positively impact Cambridgeshire to quite a large degree, I believe. Some of the questions that were asked, I think the Grafham Water one of the specifics from Noel was, were we going to back this up by actually supporting and investing it? It's been answered thoroughly, but it was actually at the last General Purposes Committee meeting, we did approve some capital investments, as been mentioned. On the adult social care debt write-off that was requested, how much of this will be added onto the burden of the council at the end of the year? There are actually, the figures are in there on page 29 of 98 at 11.2. There is 134,000 bad debt provision on the balance sheet. And when you look at the total debt, the total outstanding debt, I should put forward, of 7.01 million actual at the end of March, plus the CCG of 3.7. This is not an unsurprising figure, but it is actually listed. Like Councillor Schumann, I was very disappointed to have the hard work of the officers dismissed as luck in this way. There were hundreds and hundreds of budget lines in order to put together a budget, and to isolate two examples such as the Mbt plant. There's nothing lucky about an Mbt plant breaking down and putting all the waste into the ground. I don't regard that as lucky at all, although there is an uplift on the impact of our finances because of the good hard work of the contract that we drew up at the very start. So that favours us, but there's nothing lucky about that at all, to draw up a good contract, and it's certainly not good for the environment. And with the winter maintenance, whilst it might be lucky one year, it is difficult to manage, but we do use a 3-year running average on the winter maintenance scheme, so that therefore it is hoped that the bad years even out with the good years, and we don't just adjust our budgets on a 1-year variance. But in terms of the service that we offer, as Councillor Bates alluded to, we do offer a better service than many councils across the county. And actually our running across of the service has had some investment and some savings delivered with better outcomes. So I'll give you one example, is some computerized systems for the salt spraying, so that as the route is learnt, the run route is learnt by the computer, it needs more salt on a bend than it does on a straight, for obvious reasons. And the computer actually adjusts the amount of spray in those areas for that reason. And therefore we save salt on the long straights, but the safety is actually maintained or improved for the driver. So an improved outcome with an increased saving. So that's the level of detail that we go to in just one item, such as the winter maintenance. So I don't think it's a case of luck. If we went through the hundreds and hundreds of budget lines, we'd find many examples where things have gone over budget as they have gone under budget, and it's the resilience of the officers to adjust, be efficient and fleet of foot to bring it back in line over the year. I am surprised to get a question asking for clarity on the DSC grant from somebody who is aware of the updates through the Children's Committee, and is also asking the question, saying that we know that the LGA and the Local Government Association and the Department for Education are still discussing this in detail. So to actually, I would regard that not so much as a question, as just highlighting the issue. We don't have the questions, we keep asking it, and it's actually a national question that does need answering. The COVID pressures moving forward, a good question, Councillor Peter MacDonald. We have a lot of effort going in from the finance teams trying to identify exactly what that will be. And that word exactly is going to be a very broad brush at this present point in time. We know there will be a major impact on budgets. We know we will ask government for a large amount of that to be funded. But actually, a lot of this is an unknown quantity at this time. I can tell you that I'm on a lot of national teleconferences on the subject of coronavirus quite often. And when I hear of the resilience that our organisation puts forward, both in terms of frontline resilience, but also just in terms of accounting, where we are in accounting for it, and the questions that we're asking when people put figures forward internally is much advanced across many of our other authorities. So I'm quite pleased with where we are in understanding the position ourselves, but we all have a long, long way to go in that area. So thank you very much for your indulgence and giving that a good examination of the paper. I'm now going to move to the vote. There seems to be, apart from questions, there seems to be a general consensus in support of the recommendations. I haven't seen any hands go up or arguing with any of the recommendations. So I'm going to take this forward as a block vote in favour. If anyone disagrees and would like me to take this on an individual vote, please use the raised hand function now. Okay, I see no objections, so we will take the recommendations as carried. Thank you very much. Now going to move on to agenda item number 6, the County Council's Microsoft Enterprise Licensing Agreement. Can I invite the LGSS IT Service Delivery Manager, or I understand it's Mark that's going to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. So we're bringing this report to the committee, firstly to seek permission to go out to market for a new enterprise agreement. The current one runs out on the 14th of September this year. And secondly, we're asking for agreement to delegate the award of the contract to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the chairman of the General Purposes Committee. So Microsoft software is extensively used across the whole of the authority. It provides not just the office automation technology, but it also provides things like SQL, which provides back-end data storage, and things like Skype for Business, and going forward we'll provide things like Teams and technology which will allow us to do greater collaboration and mobile working. Over the last 6 years, we've renewed it every 3 years, and it's allowed us to bring in new technologies as they become available. This time around, it's been Windows 10, and we've started to introduce Office 365 in the pilot for that, which is very much aligned to the IT strategy that was agreed on the 16th of July 2018. The annual cost of the licensing last year was £807,000 for the year. It currently has a budget of 942, which was increased by £240,000 a year to allow for the move to Office 365. We didn't buy all of the Office 365 licensing this year because the pilot wasn't as progressed as we originally anticipated. I think the software itself is fundamental to the day-to-day work that officers undertake. So looking at things like email, calendar, Word and Excel, but also the future where we will be looking at things like Teams, which will focus on collaboration and multiple means of communication. And this will move more towards supporting the flexible working environment. So the replacement enterprise agreement, we anticipate it will be between £2.5 and £3 million over the 3-year term. So we're not expecting to require additional budget. If we do, then obviously we'll have to go back to through business planning, but it will be based on decisions strategically of what licensing we need to procure. I think that basically gives a fair summary of what the paper is asking.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark, for the introduction. I'm now looking to members. If they have a question or a comment, please raise your hand. First one, Councillor Derek Giles.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's just you mentioned team. We're on Zoom at the moment, so how will that link into team? Will we do away with Zoom or use both systems?
Okay, thank you very much, Derek. And Mark, we'll compile a few questions and take them at the end, if that's okay. Councillor Peter MacDonald.
Thanks, Chair. My only question was, reading the papers, do we have a benchmark? In other words, do we know our value for money compared to similar sized counties or authorities? Maybe we do. It's just perhaps a learning question for me.
Okay, thank you, Peter. If Mark doesn't have the answer to that, I'm sure Chris or Tom will come in. And now I have Councillor David Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. A bit puzzled about the paper because it does really appear that this is the track we're on and we really don't have any choice. So what are the options available to us? Or is it just a matter, we've got to do this, so officers should just simply get on with it?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jenkins. Councillor Lucy Netzinger.
Thank you. Just following up from what David said, it's interesting to hear that our ICT strategy was drawn up in July 2018. Given the speed at which IT changes, that actually feels like quite a long time ago. It doesn't feel to me as if we have very much choice at this point, given that the licenses run out in September this year. So I'm not suggesting for a moment that we don't move ahead with this. But it does feel to me that in the period of the 3 years that we now have, that will be now starting, is the time to start looking at alternative options for the council so that we can not find ourselves constantly over a barrel and having to pay huge amounts of money to Microsoft. So it would be good to hear that some of that work will be happening after this is agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Netzinger. I've got no more hands indicating to speak, so if I can go back to Mark and see which ones you can answer, please, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. So in response to the Zoom and Teams question, most authorities have jumped onto using Zoom during the COVID environment and the pandemic, and I think the intention from a lot of the councils is to use it for ongoing committee meetings where there's large volumes of attendees and engagement. Teams is targeted more at the typical business environment where you've got a limited number of people that are engaging with each other. It might be worth inviting Sam Smith, who is also on the call, to chip in at this point. I don't know if you've got anything you can add, Sam.
Certainly, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yes, certainly, Sam.
So absolutely, I can probably answer a few of the questions. I'll refer back to Mark for some of the financial ones. But in terms of the use of Teams, we are seeing a distinction between the requirements around public meetings like this, where Zoom does seem to work well. There are some alternative options, but Zoom seems quite good from that perspective. Teams has a lot more to offer internally, and Mark's right. It's pitched as part of the environment for officers and enterprise functions, and it comes with 365. So it's something that's at the core of collaborative working. You can do more than just conference calls with it. You can collaborate with documents and share things, and it's really quite fundamental to how officers are going to work in the future. I suspect that there is an opportunity to exploit it further for members, but I don't necessarily see it as a direct replacement for Zoom for these kind of meetings. Those things will evolve over time, but they're two separate requirements as it stands at the moment. I can also possibly just come back to the strategy question. So my apologies, I have just noted in the paper there is a typo. It wasn't July 2018 for the strategy, it was 2019, so it was last year. So my apologies for that. That got through into the public. We can amend that date. So the IT strategy was signed off by GPC July last year. And in response to Councillor Nethinger's question, we are constantly evolving the strategy. We are on a Microsoft strategy, as with almost every other local government organisation, and that's something that we will continue to review. But this agreement and this license agreement is slightly it's a contractual agreement that supports the strategy rather than the strategic decision itself. But mainly, I just wanted to kind of clarify the date. It was the strategy last year that was refined. And in terms of Councillor Jenkins' question around the choice, as I say, this is the procurement element, if you like, the contract element supporting that strategic decision from last year, which GPC approved, and that was very much a Microsoft Office-based strategy.
And if I can come back in terms of the benchmarking the value for money. So the pricing for Microsoft licensing is agreed between Microsoft and Crown Commercial Services for all public sector bodies. So they agree the price for each of the licenses that make up the Microsoft estate. What we will be doing when we go to market is we will be identifying and challenging the suppliers who will resell this software to us. We'll be looking at them to not just give us quality in terms of how they manage the account and how they guide us in terms of licensing models and best approach in terms of cost, but we'll be challenging them in terms of the licenses that we require and how they can best deliver those in terms of cost. So we will have a mixed license model for the council. So some people who will want to use Microsoft products extensively will have more expensive licensing than people who use it just for small elements of their workload. So things like mail, email and things like that. So we'll be challenging the different suppliers to come back to us and give us value in that way. And that's unfortunately the only way in which we can try and ensure we get value for money because it is a centrally agreed pricing structure.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Councillor Jenkins, you've indicated to speak again, I think?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chair. Given the answers that we've just received, and thank you for them, they were very well thought through. I just wonder if the recommendation should be to note as opposed to agree, because we're not actually making a decision as to what to re-procure. It's going to happen, so we'll just note it.
We can be advised on that from the point of view of the committee.
Sorry, who was speaking then?
Sorry, that was me. That was me, Sam. I think Mark and I would be happy to be advised in terms of the wording if that is agreeable to the committee.
So who are you seeking to advise you? The monitoring officer?
Or if unless there's any objections from the committee as a whole, we can amend the wording if that's appropriate from the monitoring officer perspective. Can take that away.
Okay. So the question from me for the monitoring officer, because we're here for a decision today, is the recommendation is to agree the procurement and then to agree to delegate the award to the Section 151 in consultation with myself. If we're asked to note it, note the reprocurement, it's note the reprocurement process. And that doesn't give authority to anyone to proceed. Therefore, if there's no authority to proceed, there isn't the same level of credibility in the negotiations. So that seems quite strange to me. So I'd like the monitoring officer to comment on the difference between the proposed change to recommendations from Councillor Jenkins and the recommendations in front of us. Or if somebody else who's more knowledgeable on the subject before the monitoring officer wishes to speak, to come in, please.
Chairman, I'm not sure the monitoring officer is on the call. I may be proven wrong.
Yeah, that's correct, Chris.
Right.
She's not, but I think the issue, to be honest, is the money. It's a key decision because of the money involved, and therefore you need to take that decision.
And I could go with that, Chairman, and just to sort of build on a comment that you made, I think you're actually spot on. You can't delegate a decision if you haven't made a decision. Therefore, you know, I think as drafted, it is in line with the Constitution.
Yeah, thank you. In which case, Councillor Jenkins, I understand your suggestion. I'm minded not to agree it. If you do wish to push it to a secondary and a vote, we'll have to do that, as is your right. So I'm asking if you wish to withdraw your proposal, please, Councillor Jenkins.
Chair, thank you. No, I'm not going to make a big issue about this, but I just wanted to be clear. We're actually not making a decision here. We're just allowing something to proceed. And maybe in future we will have options presented to us and then we would make a decision. So go with what you've got, but it was worth talking about.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jenkins. I think the decision you referred to earlier was options between Microsoft and other options, and that was covered in the IT strategy and moving forward. And now we're actually on the decision to actually award a procurement contract, the actual detail of which will be delegated, but we'll move forward then. So thank you for that. Just checking, just a question, there was a comment that I think it's Councillor Netzinger, because we've left it, and it was 2018 when we moved the strategy, which has now been corrected, my apologies, and that of Sam as well. It was 2019, I remember it quite clearly. So I don't really agree with the comment that it leaves us over a barrel, because this is the natural format of decision making. However, I can understand why you'd say that if it looks as if things get left for a period of time. So noted, but I'm glad we're able to clear that up. I'm now going to move to the vote. So if you bear with me while I swap paperwork. We're now in a position where I've seen no objections to the recommendations. So I will think that there's general consensus, and I propose to take them as a block. Again, if anyone disagrees, please use the raised hand function now. I see no objections, so we will take the recommendations as carried. Thank you very much. I'm now going to move on to agenda item number 7, the COVID-19 issues report. Officers have been asked to bring a report on the COVID-19 response to date for those services which each policy and service committee is responsible. Given the rapidly changing situation and the need to provide the committee and the public with most up-to-date information possible, I have accepted this as a late report on the following grounds. 1, the reason for lateness. To allow the report to contain the most up-to-date information possible. 2, the reason for urgency. To enable the committee to be briefed on the current situation in relation to the Council's response to COVID-19 for those services for which it is responsible. Can I ask the Chief Executive, Gillian Beasley, would you care to introduce the report, please?
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. This is your third report into the County Council's response on COVID-19. In your first report, you saw us highlighting the initial response mechanisms that were sent up and the initial actions that we took to deal with this emergency. In your second report, you endorsed the recovery framework as we move forward. And in this report, it mainly concentrates on our finances and the finances related to COVID-19. Before I invite Tom Kelly to talk to that part of the report, I just wanted to say a few words by way of introduction. I think if you look at the report, we set out in the earlier paragraphs, the fact that the strategic coordinating group is still stood up, as too is the local council response through the Gold Command senior management team. And in fact, those meetings are taking place less frequently. But what I want to emphasise to you today is that we are still in the response phase, and that's demonstrated through the work that we're doing with the shielded group and some of the most vulnerable in our society, and that's through the district and city hubs. And we still, as you know, got our coordinating hub. And in fact, Communities and Partnership Committee are keeping their eyes firmly on that work because it will be ongoing for some time. You may also know that on Friday we submitted our local care home support plan to government. That was signed off. A considerable amount of work that's being done in relation to our response and support to care homes. And in fact, there are strands to the support plan. There's a prevent strand where we're preventing infections getting into care homes from acute and community admissions. There's a reduction part of that plan where we're reducing the risk of outbreak in homes. And there's a managed part of it where we're supporting our care homes to identify and manage COVID-19. And that will also be reported through to Adults Committee, who have the responsibility for overseeing that particular plan. And a considerable amount of work was done to actually get that into government on Friday. So there is still, as I said, a considerable amount of work being done on our response plan. In relation to the other side of the equation, which is being led by Amanda Ruscombe on the, if you like, the recovery side, you will all know that yesterday we had school opening. We're waiting for data, which we're hoping to get today at lunchtime, to know how many of our children attended school in Cambridgeshire yesterday. But all of us know, after much, much hard work and considerable planning over a period of time, we did expect yesterday that 75% of our schools in Cambridgeshire would be opening for additional classes for children in reception year 1 and year 6. We expect that to rise to about 95% by the 8th of June and by 96% by the 15th of June. That will put us in the top quarter performance in the Eastern region. And we shouldn't underestimate the considerable amount of work that was put in to that. The other area I wanted to identify is the track or the test and trace work that was launched by government on the 28th of May. This is being led by our Director of Public Health, Dr. Liz Robin, and we've already stood up the Health Protection Board, which is part of the infrastructure, as well as other infrastructure to support the work on test and trace. We have to produce a local outbreak plan by the 30th of June. But as you know, there'll be considerable work being done before that time to look at the local outbreak scenario, and also the support that we have to give to the tracing, the national tracing. It's fair to say that we're having a lot of questions on this, and people are asking for clarification as to what this actually means in practice. And we are producing a detailed briefing, though, on the, if you like, the way in which test and trace will work, both nationally and locally, and we're hoping to be able to publish that to all members during the course of this week. And we are producing a questions and answer document. We are getting questions in almost daily in relation to this. And in order to be able to answer, I think, really important questions people are asking, we're going to also publish the questions as they come in and our answers. So that's also a considerable piece of work, and that will be overseen by Health Committee. And Health Committee will be receiving a report to its meeting on the 25th of June. And just finally from me, this week on Thursday, subject to the risk assessments we're doing, we'll be registering births once again from our registration services. There is a backlog, as you know, and that will be picked up during that. But that's another sign of the fact that we're getting back to some recovery in business as usual. So, Chairman, with that, I'm going to invite Tom Kelly to update on the finances, which is the subject of this report today. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. Over to you, Tom. Tom, I'm not sure if you started speaking, but I'm getting nothing through my audio feed.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry about that. Yep. So picking up on the point that Chris Mallion made earlier, coming to the table at 3.2, we've got the April and May impact shown on the left-hand side, and then the table as a whole demonstrates the overall forecasts. These closely match the submission we made to MHCLG a couple of weeks ago with a couple of updates, and then segregated by committee the impact across either new spend, income that will now not be due to receive, or areas of planned savings that can't be delivered in the current circumstances. We've participated in some work through County Council's Network and Society of County Treasurers that Grant Thornton are facilitating nationally to ensure that returns are as consistent as possible between councils, and that we're sharing information on those calculations and returns. had the full results back yet from that benchmarking, but we know at a headline level we're coming out right on the median for county councils in terms of the percentage impact we're seeing on of this additional financial consequence over and above the baseline. Obviously, there will be quite a lot of variance beneath that at service level, but a reassuring sort of validation really that we've got the right sort of level overall. So as I say, that confirms £50.7 million worth of expected expenditure. Lots of variables and uncertainty with that, mostly related to how long the disruption continues and then what sort of pathway there is from here and the recovery stages beyond that. The council's receiving significant funding contributions to mitigate that 50.7 million. There's amounts that can be claimed directly back from NHS, and we've now received 26.12 million of grant from MHCLG. And the July GPC will need to, as is its role under the Constitution, receive a more detailed report on the allocation of budgets and particularly the allocation of that grant. And at that point, there'll be further detail for the committee in terms of prioritisation and ensuring grant is provided. There are additional funding streams on top of those as well with specific purposes. I think the ones we're aware of so far are listed at 3.8. So infection and control in care homes, and Gillian referred to some of the monitoring aspects that we're already seeing and complying with on that front. And more recently, we've had announcements from government about additional funding for trace and track and outbreak management and active transport plans as well. 3.9 just gives some further details on the additional commitments under this committee's direct purview and the additional budget that's been allocated for the body storage facility were that to have been needed. And I think, yeah, that probably concludes what we need to say in terms of financial introduction.
Thank you very much, Tom. Before I invite other councillors to either comment or ask questions on the paper, I just wanted to reflect myself on the absolute tragedy of the situation. We all sit here in our various offices and homes, going through the nuts and bolts and the details of how we are best able to cope with this situation. We have many, many responsibilities, those in adult social care, vulnerable children. We now have to take on the outbreak control locally. We've got public health. And each one of those contributes to the daily lives of people trying to cope with the coronavirus situation. And we know that across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, I think 365 people have tragically lost their lives to coronavirus, including Peterborough, as enclosed in the report. And everything that we do is either trying to minimise the impact of that, lower the numbers of that, and also to try and make comfortable those, as best we can under the current situation, those that are affected by this. But whilst we use a lot of numbers, and Tom, no disrespect to you, we talk a lot about finance, and Gillian, we talk a lot about the services. At the end of the day, every one of those numbers is a real live person that's no longer with us. And that's the depth, that's the important part of our work, is that if we can minimise that by one or two or improve the lives of other people just by getting things right, that is why it's so vitally important that we get this right, our own personal efforts in this. I'm very pleased with the Cambridgeshire response. I think our officers right across every directorate, everyone I meet has pulled out all the stops and is working considerably above and beyond trying to enable us to cope with this well. I'm very proud of you all, very proud of you all. I'm very proud of the members trying to help alongside the officers. And I've said it before, this is no time for politics. This is a time when we all pull together. We've only got one aim here, and that's to get through this together. So thank you to everybody yet again. I'm now going to move on to questions and comments from other members. Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you very much. And I agree with what you've just said about the need to thank the staff at the council who have done an astonishing job in trying to cope with what's been thrown at them. But I have to say that I have extremely serious concerns about the way in which the government is managing the relaxation of the lockdown. And many members of the public are also very, very concerned about the mixed messages which are coming out from government, particularly following the extraordinary Dominic Cummings debacle last week, which has been followed by crowds of people being found in parks and open spaces all around Cambridgeshire. And for those of us who are very concerned to try and prevent a second peak, watching that breakdown of the consensus on lockdown has been really difficult. On top of this, we have had so many sudden and unexpected announcements, such as the announcement just over the weekend about very late at night, with no warning, as far as I'm concerned, to either the councils or to the primary care sector, about the people who were shielding, changes to the recommendations for people who were shielding. So there are just so many questions, and people have been left very confused and uncertain about how we're supposed to be gradually releasing from lockdown. And my major concern is that it's going too fast, and that the track and trace system is not yet ready and able to cope with it. We as a group have sent a number of questions to Gillian on this, while I recognise that some of those questions are appropriate for the Health Committee, I think it's really important that we get answers to them before the Health Committee meets, because they're not meeting until the 25th of June. So I welcome what Gillian was saying about having a briefing in answer to those questions. And we need to make sure that the public have as many of those answers as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can, because there is very, very widespread concern out there about the way in which this lockdown is being lifted. And I think it's important that everybody recognises that timing is critical in controlling this virus. There's a lot of evidence, as demonstrated on Radio 4 and the More or Less programme, that actually one of the reasons why we've had such a bad outbreak in this country is because we went into lockdown too late. If we come out of lockdown too early, the risk of a second peak of the virus is very high, and that will be much more damaging to our economy than a slower release from lockdown would have been. So while I absolutely support you, Steve, in saying that our council is managing this as well as they possibly can under the circumstances, and I'm delighted that Cambridgeshire schools have been responding in the way that they have, I think we have to recognise that the major worry that is out there in the public about the way this is being dealt with nationally, and do everything we can to try and make sure that there are sufficient answers, particularly on this question of track and trace, which has been given a huge responsibility for which has been given to the council, but as far as I'm aware, without very significant extra funding or support coming with it. So those are the questions that we have sent in to Gillian, and we hope to get written answers to as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Netzinger. Councillor Machini next.
Yes, thank you very much. I did have 2 points. I mean, the main one is to do with, well, basically what is described in the paragraph 3.5 about, you know, the whole sort of balancing the 50 million of extra expenditure, which I am reassured to see that, you know, it was quite clear and it was quite detailed, despite, I suppose, the inevitable sort of lack of clarity about whether or not we're going to get money and when. The slight worry I have is that it does basically say that, you know, we're down to the last 13 or 15 million or so, and we're not quite sure whether or not we're going to get money to cover that. And if we don't, it says, you know, we've got 18 millions in reserve, and therefore that's fine, which, I mean, I suppose it is fine in a way, but, you know, like if this year we are going to be cleared out of reserves because of this crisis, and there isn't really a particularly specific plan as to what we do next year in that case, I hope that there is a bit more planning than is in this document at this particular point, despite the fact that I recognize that a lot of stuff we don't know yet. The second point I was going to make, it was specific to transport, because there is a very fleeting mention of transport in the paragraph 3.4a, about the fact that, you know, we're going to incur an expenditure if we're going to try and make home to school transport safe for social distancing. What I was wondering was whether we can have any more detail, not particularly necessarily now, but I think the Transport Committee, and I'm sure my colleague who's on it is going to be interested in that, in how we square the circle of the government most recent advice being do not use public transport but take your car, which is going to undermine the use of public transport, and at the same time us needing to spend more money on public transport to make it safe for use. So I think that does need a bit more expansion. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Machini. We'll pick all these up at the end. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I wanted to make some comments and ask some questions around the outbreak plan, really. But before I do that, I just wanted to say about, you know, Councillor Netsinger's comments about, you know, the lifting of the lockdown and her thoughts on how well it's or not being handled. I mean, you know, my view is that the lifting of the lockdown is inevitably going to be more difficult than announcing a lockdown, which is a pretty straightforward thing. The messaging was very clear. And as time goes on, we absolutely have to start lifting the lockdown. You know, people cannot stay away from school for the next 2 years or however long it takes to find a vaccine or get better treatments. People cannot stay away from their jobs from all that time. So it's absolutely inevitable that we have to start lifting the lockdown. And it's easy to criticise when that starts happening. It's a much more nuanced thing, and it needs to happen in careful stages, which I think it is. But it's more difficult messaging, and I think it's easy to criticise. I think what's important is how we cope with that and react to it in Cambridgeshire. And I think what's really important to, the recovery and the lifting of the lockdown at a local level is how our residents respond to that and how we help to support them to manage that in the right way, because everybody has personal responsibility to take around this. At the end of the day, you know, government, local government, can say whatever it likes, but we all collectively have a personal responsibility to behave properly, and that's what matters. And people obviously need to understand what they're being asked to do at what time. So I'm particularly interested in the outbreak plan, Gillian. There has been, for obvious reasons, a massive focus so far on deaths and the number of deaths, and obviously every single one is regrettable, it's terrible. But I think, for me, the emphasis needs to shift now in our communications to the rates of infection, because it is the rate of infection that leads to deaths. And if the rate of infection increases, the death rate will increase. And we all have a responsibility to avoid infection. That is our personal responsibility. That's what we need to do. We all have to take charge of avoiding getting infected. And by doing that, we are protecting those people that are shielding, the clinically vulnerable, our care homes, our frontline staff who are working on the front line, being exposed to people who are infected. And that's the messaging that we need to really focus on. So I'm interested in the outbreak plan in terms of how local this goes. So, I'm really keen to understand and to illustrate to people that gatherings in parks and irresponsible behaviour and people getting too close to each other and not respecting social distancing, and how and if we can evidence that coming through, in the next 10 days, 14 days, in the rate of infection increasing. And that requires sophistication at a local level in terms of the numbers and the tracking system. And I'm interested to understand how detailed we can be about that, and our communications plan around that. And I think that that is the strongest possible way that we can support our residents to cope well with this, to understand, that their actions have a direct impact and a direct result on frontline staff and our care homes and our clinically vulnerable, and that their behaviour matters. And I'm also interested to understand how this interacts with district councils and what role district councils have to play in supporting this, and how we can step up and support you at a very local level. you know, and I am interested in this idea of understanding, you know, the infection rates at postcode street level, because I think that's very, very powerful, you know, when people understand what's going on in their locality, in their community, in their street with their neighbours. You know, I think it's incredibly powerful messaging. So I'd really like to hear more about that as the plans develop.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bailey. We'll get some responses to that in a little while. Councillor Kavanagh. Noel, are you with us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Noel.
Oh, great. Yeah, I've got two themes. One is transport and the second one's to do with education. Transport, I'd just like to join everyone else in congratulating the staff and all the hard work that's been undertaken during this whole crisis. I mean, across all aspects of the county. And as you know, I work closely with the highways, and I was very impressed by the amount of funding that it was the combined authority who, how should I say, were the front people to put in the bid. But I know that behind the scenes, the county officers worked really hard to get a list of possible proposals into central government as quickly as possible. And it was also very pleasing to see that I think it's the figures, was it 2,875,000 has been awarded to the county council and Peterborough, and it's all very good news. And to have the money, and I know that the teams, the county highway teams, are working hard now on the priority lists, and you know, councillors like myself are putting forward suggestions across the whole county. But my question is, and it's in the light of some of the information we've had through about illnesses amongst staff, people who've fallen victim to COVID-19 and so on. Is yes, we've got the money and we've got the list of projects. Have we got the staff available to deliver these proposals, these new measures? Because I know that the highway staff are under great pressure. So it's actually, how should I say, a sympathetic question. Have we got the bodies on the ground to do all these changes to our highways? The second question is relating to schools. Gillian mentioned, what struck me has been quite a high rate of return from my expectations. I didn't think there'd be that large a percentage of returns to schools. I suppose that's based on what has been said to me by my constituents and so on, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of concern and anxiety, and I share that anxiety with parents and staff. And it's happened that people have gone back to school, but my worry is that something could happen, as happened in France. When they reopened the schools, there was a spike upwards in the number of infections, infections related to schools, you know, whether they were parents or people at home when the children came home and so on. But there was actually a spike upwards. Now, my question is there provision in place to react to a situation like that happening in Cambridgeshire? You know, a spike upwards, which is related to our young people going back to school. And I'm not asking that in a negative way. I'm asking that in a very positive way, because I just know there's a huge amount of anxiety out there. And I'd just like to know if there is a plan in place and what will happen if there is a discernible spike upwards in the number of infections related to our young people going back to school. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Lorna Dupre.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to say something about the local public health context, and in particular about Huntingdonshire. And I want to start, and I'd like this to be noted, because in previous comments I've made today, my comments of thanks and praise to the officers were overlooked, or indeed it was claimed they didn't exist. But I want to start, and I want this to be noted, by thanking the Council's Public Health Intelligence team in the Public Health Directorate for the enormously helpful data they're now providing weekly about the spread of COVID-19. We in England are now in a very precarious position. Lockdown is being released piecemeal by sudden and unexplained announcements in ways which seem to make little sense and which many of the governments advising scientists do not support. At a time when England, and I mean specifically England, has the worst COVID-19 mortality rate in the world, at a time where there are more daily deaths in this country from COVID-19 than there were when we entered lockdown, and at a time when we still have no effective functioning test, track and trace operation in place. As at the 25th of May, there have been 1,518 laboratory confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and as at 15th of May, tragically 365 COVID-related deaths. That's likely to be an underrepresentation of actual infection rates because there's been so little testing, and what testing there has been so sporadic. We in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough have lower infection rates than the average for England, but the picture isn't uniform. And it's in that context that I wish to mention Huntingdonshire. Huntingdonshire is the only district in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough whose infection rate is higher than the average for the East of England. It's had a later peak in cases than the rest of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and it's had the largest number of COVID-related deaths in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough as at 15th of May. As lockdown is eased without effective testing, tracking and tracing in place, it's all the more important to be aware of local hotspots so that local action can be taken. And I'm not saying that to alarm anybody in Huntingdonshire, because I don't believe they should be alarmed. I'm doing this to draw attention to the need for good, practical, local information about what's going on. And when I talk about local action being taken, I don't just mean action by the public authorities corporately. I mean that local members of this authority should be made aware of local hotspots in their communities and in care homes. And I mean that the public need to be aware and informed, so that they can make their own decisions about whether to send their children to school or allow visits to grandparents or continue to shield vulnerable relatives. We've heard Councillor Bailey talk about taking personal responsibility. I agree to some extent with that view, actually, but most other countries have been much more successful than we have at controlling this virus. And that's been because their governments have taken clear and coherent action at the right time. We must be aware of what we can do individually, but we mustn't allow this government to pass on its responsibilities wholesale to individual citizens. Different localities in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough may well need different levels of caution. Social distancing in parts of Huntingdonshire at the moment may need to be different from that in other parts of the county. Or the situation may move on and the pattern in Huntingdonshire and other localities may change. Gathering and sharing the most local possible information and taking members and the public into our confidence is an essential contribution that this council can make to keeping the public safe at this challenging and very risky time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. Councillor Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the officers for including specific COVID-related data in this report. And thanks especially, as Lorna said, to the Public Health Research Group for the excellent summaries that we get on a weekly basis of infection and stuff like that. But just a bit of a caution on this report. It's not quite as good as it could be because we've got a lot of single points of data, and as such they're not terribly valuable if we don't show the trends, we don't give context or we don't give a little bit more detail. They're headlines, but not much else. So maybe we can, next time we get this report, it'll be iterated and improved a little bit further. I want to go on, and to some extent, I'm going to echo what Lorna and Anna Bailey have been saying, because as with most of my colleagues, I'm involved in the local response groups, which the County Council, of course, has been very vocal in supporting and saying what a good job they're doing. They can do their job well if they get information. And we need to be able to provide them information about what's happening in local districts, the infection rates, so they know how to gear up their support for individuals in the community who might need support. And going forward, as this whole thing unwinds, and as we see furloughs turned into redundancies, we need to have data on what's happening economically, whether unemployment is going up, and to what extent the local groups are having to gear up to provide more material assistance rather than the assistance that was appropriate in the early stages of this. Now, Amanda's been very helpful in digging out some stuff for me yet so far, but we're not seeing the granularity that these response groups really need. Down at the division level and further, we do need information on economic activity or the opposite thereof, and we do need information on local infection rates. So perhaps, Chair, you could use your good offices to encourage that to be provided to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. Councillor Peter Hudson.
Thank you, Chair. I despair a bit, really. I spoke to our excellent Director of Public Health at the weekend, and I had to actually beg her to take some time off to relax, to get her mind working again, and perhaps say hello to her family, because she's working non-stop with the rest of the team. Our thanks are just, we can't thank them because they're doing too much for thanks. They're just incredible. And whether lockdown come too late and unlock is too early is not what we're here today to talk about, political posturing. That's way above our level. This is about this authority's response to this crisis. And it's about our people, our residents, not about politics. You know, so get in your soapbox, and we should be working together on this. Test and trace, track and trace, going to track and trace. It's come to Public Health very soon. And if Councillor Nettinger wants some information on that, well, tomorrow afternoon is 1600 hours. There's a Public Health Chair and lead members briefing. The agenda is out, so lead members of all political groups know what's on the agenda. And on top of the agenda is briefing by the Director of Public Health on the work done so far and ongoing work on test and trace and track and trace, etc. And then one would assume that the lead members after the briefing would go and brief their political groups and the other members of their group. This is on the health committee. That's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work. That's why we have these lead member briefings. A lot of people have been asking what's going to happen with track and trace and where we go. We're obviously going to go, and it's been very well publicised, we go to some sort of local outbreak engagement boards, where the directors of public health or the upper tier authorities working with PH England health protection teams will create these boards and working through COVID-19 health protection boards. And also there'll be a public facing board led by council members to commute openly with the public. So we will have a local outbreak engagement board to provide political ownership, public facing engagement and communication for any local outbreak response. The multi-agency COVID-19 Health Protection Board, led by the Director of Public Health, will be organising where and if and how and why there is local outbreaks. And the local outbreak engagement team of elected members will be the public front of that organisation. So some further draft guidance. It's all being put together at the moment, and there'll be more details at the meeting tomorrow, but member-led engagement boards are really important. So the potential terms of reference for our local engagement board will be to meet in public as local political leaders to provide appropriate transparency and communication about the COVID-19 local outbreak plan and its implementation. So we can therefore update the public on the latest local trends, the latest local issues, and the latest local operational decisions taken for COVID-19 management. We provide public leadership to support required outbreak management actions, for example, local lockdowns or closures, and we'll provide the opportunity for public questions. We'll provide leadership for the wider engagements, for example, with district and city council, parish councils, and combined authority, community groups to support implementation of any local outbreak management plan. And that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hudson. Councillor Mark Goldsack.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to raise the point on communications and how effective they've been from the county. The stats and figures themselves are obviously coming in from all over the place, but actually the level of communication in what I consider to be a national shower of communication information. I know Councillor Jenkins makes a very valid point there. Many of us sit on this Zoom session today have been involved daily, locally, with what's going on. And I can assure you that the biggest feedback I'm getting from vulnerable residents, elderly residents, isolated residents is, oh, you know, everything's negative, everything's down, everything's dour. Well, I'd like to say that Christine Birchall and her team and everybody has done a fantastic job in maintaining a really good positive level on that. They've put out some really good stories. And actually, I think it's beholden on us, the members that are involved, to feed them with good stories and get stuff out there, because, you know, let's face it, going into a lockdown is incredibly easier than coming out of it, whatever we say. And I think it's a time, and mental health issues out there are growing. You know, you see the report, many of you will have read the report this week on the dramatic increase in domestic violence that's going on out there at the moment. You know, we need more positivity out there. And I'm afraid some of the comments today have been just to, you know, reiterating what I'm seeing nationally on the negativity. Let's get some positive out there and have a positive effect on mental health for people that are still suffering, still isolated. I can tell you yesterday, my wife is a 12-week lockdown person, and getting the news yesterday that she could go for a walk, well, you know, it was like winning the lottery for her. She felt $1 million. Going for a walk and being able to look through the window at her granddaughter that lives in this village, what we haven't seen, was just an absolute delight. So let's get that more positivity out there and lift the spirits of our Cambridgeshire people, not keep knocking them down with negativity.
Thank you very much, Councillor Goldsack. There's some very valid points there. Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I welcome what I hear from Peter Hudson with this track and trace. There's no doubt about it in Huntingdonshire, and especially in where I represent in St Neots, there is major concern as to why Huntingdon seems to be a bit of a hotspot. And I can't answer the question, and I don't think anybody can say why our particular district, or parts of our district, seem to be suffering more than others. So I welcome this, and I hope that the reason for these, I think there's 3 hotspots, is Sawtry, Simon, Huntingdon and St Neots, and it's worrying to people. It really is worrying. Majority of people I speak to or come across in my daily walks, etc., respect the 2-metre rules, etc., without any worries whatsoever. But there is this underlying current of saying, well, you know, we're at the end of it now, but I don't think we are. One only has to look at the deaths in this country, compared daily deaths in this country, compared to those in Europe. And most of Europe is down to single figures now, I believe, per day, but we're in triple figures still. So I am very, very cautious about unlocking the lockdown. It's got to happen. but I think we've got to take a lot more caution on it. So the sooner I get to know why we're in a hot spot, I'm probably in the centre of it, the better I will like it. So thank you, Peter. Yeah, keep us informed. Thank you, Chairman. Let me say.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you. Councillor Ian Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of points, I think, in respect of Councillor McSheeny. I think I'll take that question away and get a bit more detail for all members, I think. We have been working with Stagecoach and we have been working with the Combined Authority, and I know there is a lot more work which has taken place, and we can reflect that, and I'll ask officers in Transport to do that. In respect of Noel Kavanagh's question, a lot of the highways and transport staff, of course, about 80 of them have been redeployed. Lucky enough, some of them are now trickling back, but it is causing us, if you like, some concern a bit about have we got enough people, which is, I think, what Noel's saying, and we are asking other directorates and the Greater Cambridge Partnership for some assistance. Just a little reminder, I think, for perhaps members generally, and maybe that needs to be reiterated. There was a press release which was put out by Huntingdonshire District Council, and also a very useful YouTube message from Dr. Liz Roban, which did go out last week about the issue in Huntingdonshire. I'm getting a feeling that maybe not everybody's seen it, so maybe we should send it round again to members. I saw it, I saw the press release, and it gave me a lot more comfort, and hopefully it can give other members like Derek that's comfort. So maybe we could send that around again, Mr. Chairman, might be useful. So other than that, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. Councillor Bywater.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll try and be as quick as I can. Really, just to follow on what Councillor Bates just said there, someone mentioned Sawtry, where I represent. This really was about misinformation. I know Councillor Goldsack said about communication. You know, communication is key. It's everybody's responsibility, not just the county councils. It's every one of us here, every member in every district and county council. Communication is key, because if you give wrong information out, which happened in this case, it causes all sorts of problems and creates a huge amount of work for already overworked officers. You know, when it comes to the information about COVID in hotspots such as Sawtry, you have to look at the detail. The detail was that there were people presenting to the GP with COVID-related symptoms, not COVID diagnosis, nothing. It was COVID-related symptoms. And if anybody's like my daughter, they cough and sneeze at this time of year with hay fever. And Liz Roban, Dr. Liz Roban, was absolutely crystal clear in her message last week. It came across very helpful and cleared up a lot of points. So it is absolutely adamant, crucial that you watch that video. So I'll move on. Just to pick up on a point that Councillor Kavanagh raised in relation to school, officers may cover it, but I'll use my gift as chair to cover it in relation to infections in schools. Every school has done a thorough risk assessment. These risk assessments have been checked by the local authority and signed off. They've also been provided, every risk assessment has been provided to the unions as well. So if a child is presenting with symptoms of COVID in school, there is to use a military phrase, an SOP in place, standard operational procedure, to deal with that child or member of staff. So it's isolated, PPEs available, and it's dealt with as efficiently and as carefully as possible to minimise risk of infection. Okay, so all heads have been briefed on that. I've had countless meetings with headmasters, with John Lewis, 250 on Friday, I think it was, with heads in relation to dealing with some of these issues. So rest assured, Councillor Kavanagh, that this is very much on the radar. It will be monitored on a daily basis. So that's the message I want to get out. So it's good to see so many parents coming back, because I understand some of the concerned parents who didn't want to go to school, but there are also a lot of parents who want their children to go to school. And at the end of the day, COVID's going to be around for a long period of time, and there is going to be no ideal opportunity now. So we need to just get on with it, remain calm, and deliver our risk assessments and ensure that our children are safe. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bywater. I've got no other members indicating speak. Could I ask Gillian, Tom, if you wish to come back on, furnish some information on some of the points raised, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll start. Councillor Netzinger, just first of all, we will be answering those questions in advance of Health Committee. They are questions that are being asked by others, and there are indeed other questions coming in. But that, as I said, will also be accompanied by, I think, hopefully a clear explanation of what test and track actually means in the locality. And we're working on that as we speak, because we recognise through, as Councillor Goldsack said, the good communications team that we've got, we will step up those communications and make sure that there is clarity around those issues. Moving on, I think, to a really good point that Councillor Bailey has made and picked up by others around this issue of an outbreak plan. And perhaps we could see it kind of as a misnomer, because that suggests there is going to be an outbreak. And actually, I think what Councillor Bailey was extolling was the need to prevent and avoid people from getting infected. And I think that is going to be a key feature of the work that we do in the immediate time, because although we've got to get our outbreak plan by the 30th of June, I think it would be wrong for us not to start now on that preventative work. And part of that will be mobilising what we call a community rapid response plan, which will be owned, I think, by district councils, which is going to be mobilising what we've already got actually in the localities through the community hub work, is people who will be able to rapidly respond, communicate messages about social distancing, but also be aware that if there are people congregating, that we actually get in there and we start dispersing, we start getting positive messages about the importance of maintaining social distancing. And that will be supported by what Councillor Hudson said in the terms of the member involvement in that, because we know that the intelligence we get on this kind of preventative is absolutely vital from the members who are seeing things day by day. So prevention and avoidance is going to be at the heart, and is it going to start as we speak? We're starting on that work. And tomorrow in the strategic coordinating group, we'll be talking with the police, but also others about how we can do this effectively. I think there's a really good point made about data, being on top of data, understanding it, translating it, and then taking action in relation to what it is telling us. And just to reassure you that although the Health Protection Board meets weekly, there will be a daily meeting of professionals who will look at the local data, and that's also right down to street level on what that data is telling us, so that we can deploy actions to that community rapid response groups, as I say, that are in the districts, so that we can take action immediately. And that's where there is issues around the virus spreading. So this is not going to be a sitting complacently week by week. This is going to be, as we've done with all the other activities we've done on the response phase, a day by day careful look at the data, our public health teams translating that data for us, telling us what it means, and then us working on the response that we need to take in relation to that. All of that comes together in the outbreak plan, which we've talked about. So it will be about prevention. It will be about how we link with the national test and trace. It will be about the local action that we will help the national response track people and trace people. But it will be about how we work with our communities, building on the fantastic work that we're seeing through the district hubs and through the coordinating hubs, and with our volunteers, helping us to make sure as best we can that we manage the opening up of our society going forward with COVID-19. So just to reassure you, that is being looked at comprehensively and carefully, and you'll see that when you see the notes come through in relation to how the plans are shaping up. With respect to Councillor Kavanagh, the schools question has been answered, and thank you for that, Councillor Bywater. And in relation to just staffing generally and making sure that there's sufficient staff to implement new measures, whether it be in highways or indeed elsewhere, we have got detailed staffing plans, which we're now looking at both in terms of highways, but also in other parts of the council. Where, you know, we're opening our registration services, and we've been deploying people into the hubs. So that's work as we speak. We have got enough staff at the moment, but that is something, again, that we keep a twice weekly eye on in the work that we're doing through the gold work through our strategic management teams. In relation to what Councillor Jenkins is saying, he wants more data. There is a considerable amount of data that sits behind those weekly or the reports that the Director of Public Health puts out. If there's further data he would like, then perhaps he'd like to contact me and I will talk to the Public Health team about that. Chairman, that's all I wanted to say in response to the questions that were answered. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Gillian. Good set of answers. Tom, do you wish to add anything on the finance ones?
Just very briefly then to come back further on Councillor Machini's point about reserves. We've deliberately been quite guarded about that aspect, and I think really obviously the council and the sector's first option is that funding from government comes forward to be sufficient to meet all of those pressures that we are seeing. Obviously at the moment there's still considerable uncertainty. And to reassure the committee, a lot of work is going on internally. SMT actually met this morning to work through exactly that challenge of where this will leave our finances and how we respond to that going through business planning going forward. So yes, acknowledge it's a live risk and much work to do on it.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further hands, I'll come in with a few comments of my own. The first thing I want to pick up on is the political element. I did say we're all in this together and we need to work together. And I feel like to a certain extent that fell on deaf ears with some people during this debate, because today's committee meeting is about how this council handles itself and how we're able to help the residents of Cambridgeshire, and not an opportunity to try and discuss, dissect and abdicate the responsibilities of the government. But that went on to some degree. But I understand that that does have an impact locally, and so I let it ride for that very reason. But although I was disappointed, those messages could have come across without that. But the important thing is there was a lot of recognition for how effectively Cambridgeshire is running, and the vast majority of comments revolved around questions about areas that we were uncertain of how things were operating and how were they moving forward. And tell you that I'm involved, as is my deputy leader and all committee chairs, on very regular basis, discussing with the executive how to handle every evolving part of this picture. I'll pick up on the one that Tom's just referred to. So the finances, there's over £50 million over and above our budget, either spent or predicted to spend, and that just takes us to the end of the summer, and we don't know moving forward how much more that will be. We know that £10 million is coming in from other sources, and £26 million has come in from government, leaving a £13 million gap. So in this paper, we have written down that actually the gap where it stands at the moment could be met by general reserves. And the comment was, and that's fine. I don't think you meant that's fine. I think you meant, you know, the way it came across was that it got dealt with. I think what we're trying to say is at this particular point in time, we have a way of dealing with this. There are other councils looking at their finances at the moment, and they are in deep discussions with their Section 151 officer. For the public, that's the Chief Finance Officer, as to whether to issue a Section 114 notice, a bankruptcy notice, or whether they can keep their finances in a good place so that they are not issuing publicly a bankruptcy notice. And that's what I talk about the difference of us handling Cambridgeshire and how Cambridgeshire is going to get through this together compared to what I see in other parts of the country. So no, we're not flippant that £13 million or however much it may be is a great big hole in our finances and the general reserves can cover it. We are in intense conversations going on internally as well as on a national level with government through all the lobbying agencies to explain that this amount of money is not easy to find, and it is only a temporary measure if we find it, if we have to use general reserves. But we are not in the same situation as many others. On messaging, I have never seen so much messaging pumped out by this county council or any area as I have on coronavirus. We have messaging directly to our members that they can pass on to their parishes. We have messages to the media. We have messages internally. We have these meetings such as these update meetings. It is absolutely extensive, but the impact of coronavirus across our services, across the economy, across our residents is massive. And so it's not surprising that we get questions that haven't been thought of before by anybody in the system. But as soon as we receive those questions, as was described earlier, we put up FAQs on all our websites, send that back throughout our channels and answer them as fully as we can with the information we have at hand. I'm very pleased with the actual amount of messaging we're giving out to communities. But the one thing that I find difficult is that everybody wants to move on to, we have an element that we deal with, which is the positive messaging to maintain spirits during this crisis. We have data that Councillor Jenkins was talking about and a request for more data. What I'm disappointed about is that bit about personal responsibility. I'm not blaming the personal responsibility here. It's the fact that nobody wants to keep promoting the message of washing your hands repeatedly and thoroughly. Not many people want to repeat the message about keeping that social distancing at 2 meters and the vulnerable and shielded people. And that's getting diluted and drowned out by people requiring things that will go in the media, be in the messaging spot. The truth of the matter is, if we maintain ourselves adhering to the guidelines that have been imposed right from day one, the washing of the hands, the 2 meter social distancing, the stay alert, we are much less likely of catching and transmitting the virus than any of the other measures that are in place, the outbreak controls and all that. If we stick to the guidelines, and that is a message we need the public to hear, and them to take personal responsibility for it, then we will all come through this much more together. Home to school transport was mentioned. It's in there for a very specific reason, as is the collection of business and non-domestic rates. Those were singled out as possibly two of the highest significant impacts looking forwards, crystal ball gazing, if you like. And I just want to point out the differences between home to school transport and public transport. So the similarities is the fact that it may be reliant on a coach, and if social distancing is imposed on a coach, you don't get very many people onto that. And in home to school transport, the responsibility lies with us on getting certain cohorts of children, both mainstream and special needs, into schools on a daily basis. And if that opens up where we return to a more like a full attendance at schools, whilst there might be social distancing needs on the transport, it would be incredibly difficult to maintain. Whereas public transport has exactly the same responsibilities, but the finance for that does not hit the council directly. Now, when we're talking about £10 million worth of mainstream transport and £10 million worth of special needs transport a year on an ordinary year, you could imagine if you get 9 children on a coach instead of 50, what that would do with the council's finances. So it's a situation that we need to understand fully and work through with the government, with the public health executive, how we move forward in areas such as that. In coming out of lockdown, one of the things that perhaps wasn't mentioned enough is the damage being done of being in lockdown. And I'm not referring to the economy here. I understand a lot of people compare the decision on coming out of lockdown being a decision of the economy versus that of the public health. And we hear from government many times, the economy does not come first, saving lives comes first. And that's a message I agree with. But there is hidden damages that we're becoming more and more aware of. The mental health strain on the nation as a whole, and particularly on our vulnerable residents, is extreme at the moment during the lockdown period. And as we heard from Councillor Goldsack, the sheer relief of his wife being able to go out into the parks to exercise, to visit her granddaughter through a window, was immense. And those things will make a real difference to mental health. So it's important that we balance out some of the hidden aspects of the lockdown and take them into our considerations as well, even though it's not our decision whether to come out of lockdown. But it certainly does have my sympathy that there are more impacts than just purely the economic one. And I might add that domestic violence is another one that's something that we need to be extremely aware of at the moment. Last thing I want to touch on is the R rate, the infection rate. And I understand from the information, sorry, it's two last things. The one is the R rate and the other one is mortality rate. The R rate, which government seems to be moving forward as the main key driver for how they decide on how to come out of lockdown. I cannot begin to describe how important that is, or why it makes so much sense. It's quite simply, if the R rate is less than 1, the rate of infection nationally is decreasing, and if the R rate is less than 1 in your area, and we do need to monitor our local areas for that. Whether it's 0.5, 0.7, 0.9, 0.99, the fact is the infections are decreasing. If it goes 1, it's level. If it goes 1.001, it's increasing. So we need that R rate to stay underneath 1. And despite the easing of the lockdown, it comes back down again to personal responsibility and adhering to guidelines, that we keep it down below 1. And that's one of the messages we need to get back to government. And just a simple fact that was claimed earlier on about the mortality rates, England being the highest. The mortality rate is a quite simple measurement per millions, and it's not something you want to get into international competitions about, because it is different for each country, their figures and how they measure coronavirus, how the doctors put it on death certificates, how many people there are to count it in the first place. But at this present point in time, UK wouldn't be the first. San Marino, Belgium, Spain, all ahead. But it's not a significant way of measuring things, and it's nothing that we need to be basing our science on, because the differences in cultures and sciences. I think that we've given this a very, very good airing, and I think the amount of conversation on the subject just shows and demonstrates the level of understanding, the level of commitment that all our councillors and all our officers are giving to this point. There is nothing more important in our day-to-day lives at the moment. So thank you again to the officers. I'm now going to move back to the actual method of voting, etc. on this paper, and thank you for your time. Okay, we are asked to note the contents of this report. I think we've taken that as noted. I'm not seeing any hands to wish to speak, so thank you very much. I'm now going to move on to agenda item number 8, the Treasury Management Report Quarter 4, update for 2019-20. Can I ask the Chief Finance Officer, Chris Mallion, to introduce the report, please?
Actually, sorry, apologies, Chairman, it's going to be Tom again.
Tom again, all right, thank you very much. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is, as you say, the Quarter 4 report for Treasury Management. As normal, we give the economic commentary and context at the beginning, although at the moment, of course, some fairly extraordinary developments that are noted there as part of the response to the pandemic. We summarise the borrowing and investment position, and with giving additional attention to those cash flows at the moment, and those patterns of inbound grants and outbound payments that are unusual. In section 3.6, we note that borrowing from the PWLB, Public Works Loan Board, remains at a premium, and some of the responses that the council has made to that includes continuing with interlocal authority borrowing, the energy schemes where we were successful at bidding for the reduced infrastructure rate, and the first borrowing under that heading has now taken place. And we're working with the UK Municipal Bonds Agency, which is progressing a bond issuance, which will be, we expect, at a favourable rate compared to PWLB. So that area now moving forward. We set out in the Appendix 2 the compliance with all of the Treasury and Prudential indicators at the end of the year. And then lastly, Recommendation B and Section 5.11 deal with the next stage of the investment in multi-class credit. This has already been considered in more detail by both CNI, its investment group, and GPC actually, about expanding our investment portfolio into multi-class credit. and the advantages that brings in terms of diversity of the investments, liquidity, and potentially yield. Reddington, who are the council's externally appointed external investment advisor, have had a further look at that in given the current economic situation, and we're moving ahead with selection of a investment manager for that specific fund. In section 5.11.4, we list some of the specific changes we would need to make through full council in due course to the Treasury Management Strategy to enable that fund. So that's kind of giving GPC that visibility that is likely to come through to July full council. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tom. Would any members of the committee wishing to ask a question or make a comment, please use the raised hand function. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have got a couple of questions. The first one is on page 70 of the agenda, the full agenda bundles, and it's section 5.11.4. And also earlier, the report talks about permitting exceptions or individual consideration of sub-investment grade credit. And I was wondering whether Tom could unpack that a little bit for us as to what that actually means in practice. My other question was on page 74 of the agenda bundle in the implications at 10.4, that there are no significant implications for this priority for net zero carbon emissions for Cambridgeshire. Does that mean that this authority does not invest in fossil fuels in any way, directly or indirectly? Because presumably if it does invest in fossil fuels, then there is a zero carbon implication. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dupre. I've got no other hands indicating to speak, so Tom, could you answer those questions, please?
Yeah, so the as it currently stands, so dealing with the investment grade question first of all. So in the Treasury Management Strategy that's linked there, the range of investments that the council will normally invest in, and where those have a credit rating, the minimum kind of current credit rating that that we would consider, particularly from the viewpoint of the priority of the Treasury Management Strategy being around the security of public funds, is listed. So what this is acknowledging really is that this particular type of multi-class credit fund, and we won't know the exact answer to this until we've progressed a bit further with the selection of a manager, but it may need to be added to the Treasury Strategy as a different or a further type of fund, and it may either be, depending on how it's rated, it may take us into a lower grade of investment product amongst a mix of assets across the portfolio. It may take us into new territory. I think what our investment advisors have been clear about, and this is kind of covered in more detail in the reports that have gone to the C&I investment group, is that you manage that risk across the range of the portfolio that the investment manager provides in terms of multi-class credit, and that there is, although there are currently risks to company incomes, and that presents risks, and in fact to all types of rating being affected in different ways, that there is also kind of value at this point of time in the market in very reputable firms offering corporate bonds at rates that would form an attractive part of that package. This would form just one part of the council's broader portfolio, but we're listing it there as it is a departure from the current approach. On 10.4 and net zero carbon, I think we'd need to come, I appreciate this opportunity to check that in more detail, but as far as we've gone so far, our Treasury investments are very straightforward really in terms of meeting council's cash flow needs, and nothing springs to mind in terms of where there would be certainly a direct investment in any you know, an area with a carbon impact that's unusual. We don't have direct equity investments, although you know, we can have a further look at that, I think, in terms of CCLA's managed fund for which does hold a number of equities, and what they do around ESG. So we'll take that away to just look at a fuller response on that.
Okay, thank you. I've got no other hands indicating to speak. I've got nothing to add in. So there seems to be a general consensus in support of the recommendations. I've not heard anyone speak against them, so I propose to take them as a block. If anyone disagrees, please use the raised hand function now. Okay, I see no objections, so we will take the recommendations as carried. Thank you. I'm now going to move on to agenda item 9, the General Purposes Committee Agenda Plan, Training Plan, Appointments to Outside Bodies, Groups and Panels. Can I invite the Democratic Services Manager, Michelle Rowe, to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The report is divided into 4 parts. The first part is your agenda plan, and the changes that I have relate to your next meeting in July, where there will be an item on the implementation of software-defined networking solution as part of Shire Hall data centre move, and also an item on fostering allowances. In relation to your training plan, that's just for you to note. And then the other items relate to outside bodies and internal advisory groups and panels. The representatives on the report are your current representatives, but you need to approve their appointment for the next municipal year. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. I'm going to ask the councillors if anyone wishes to comment or question. Councillor Netsinger.
Thank you. Just to comment on, as a result of the changes that were made to the committees at full council, this committee now has responsibility for economic activity and that side of the council's work. It doesn't seem to have appeared, and no changes seem to have been made in our agenda plan. Given the importance following the coronavirus outbreak of supporting local businesses, I would expect to see some progress and some plans being made by the council to support work being done in other areas, or at least to update us on work that is needed to support local businesses and make sure that the Cambridgeshire economy can come through the coronavirus crisis in as good a shape as possible. Will those changes be being made, and should we expect to see some work also in our training plan looking at that?
Okay, on the first point about our forward agenda plan, the forward agenda plan covers primarily key decisions, particularly whilst we're under teleconference. So we try and avoid just papers for noting. But the economic recovery plan is being primarily led by the combined authority. However, we will include information as it becomes fit and available, and our ability to involve ourselves in that in our coronavirus update plan, in specific reference to the coronavirus question. In other areas where we have responsibility for economic, sometimes that does refer to consultation responses, key decisions, etc. And of course, those, as they become apparent, will come forward. I do note the point that you make about the training plan, so I'll go with officers to actually think about the training plan and whether we should include something on that, as it is a new responsibility for this committee. Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you very much, Chair. I say this with somewhat level of irony and slightly tongue-in-cheek, because it's not something that's personally exercises me, but on page 97, I note that the members' equality group is made up entirely of females, and I can't help believing that if that was the other way round, there'll be the most almighty fuss about it. And I wonder if that's entirely representative of the council. Thank you.
Point well made, Councillor Bailey. normally under circumstances like that, I would say if you've got a problem, you go and sit on the group. But in your case, you're a lady as well, so that doesn't quite apply.
And I don't have a problem, I hasten to add. It causes me no, it doesn't exercise me at all. I have no personal problem, but I think there are other members who may do.
No, you introduced it tongue in cheek, and I agreed. But yes, it is a point that really is not balanced, and perhaps we all need to look at the membership of that and think about it. But yeah, point well made. Mark, I saw your hand. Have you signalled at the screen to speak? Because I've not seen your hand on the right. Was that just an inadvertent move? Okay, all right. I have no other speakers, in which case I shall take the recommendations, if anyone has on block. If anyone has an issue with that, please raise your hand. So we will take the recommendations as carried. Thank you very much. Moving on. Agenda item number 10, exclusion of press and public. I propose that the press and public be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of the following report on the grounds that it is likely to involve the disclosure of exempt information under paragraphs 3 and 5 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as it refers to information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, open brackets, including the authority holding that information, close brackets, and information in respect of which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. Could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second that, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Roger Hickford, you have a raised hand. Thank you. So Councillor Hickford is seconding. Any discussion, or can I move to the vote? We will now move to the vote. There seems to be a general consensus in support of the recommendations, so I propose to take them as a... If anyone disagrees, please use the raised hand function now. I see no objections, so we will take the recommendation as carried. Thank you. As this is the final item on this agenda, I would like to express my thanks to those members of the public and press who have taken time to watch the meeting today via the Council's website. This broadcast will now end. Thank you.